give us an overall how you're feeling with second final deadline? What are you happy about?
Yeah, I'm feeling good. And one of the changes for me that's it comes with this position in this office as rank and file. I actually would run bills and have priorities, and that role's changed for me, right? So my job now is to ensure that our caucus is seeing their priorities through, and I feel that at the end of the second funnel, we feel like we're in a pretty good spot. Yeah, for sure.
Where do you feel like your caucus is at for property taxes?
So that's great. So last week the Senate introduced an amendment to our property tax bill. This week the House introduced an amendment to their property tax bill, and that's part of those conversations that are taking place as we work towards building consensus, and those amendments kind of help provide some more clarity for both chambers. And so that's a result of those conversations, and I feel really comfortable moving forward with the amendments that we both filed. And then we'll again sit down and look at where we have overlap. Obviously, there's going to be some sort of revenue limiter. We're not sure where that's at. SAVE and TIF and all those components that are consistent in both bills, and we're in the governor's proposal. But those amendments will help us kind of narrow down, the major talking points and move us in the right direction. So I feel really good where we're heading with our conversations. I do.
Do you remain confident that the legislature will pass something related to eminent domain this year?
I do. Yeah. And again, look. We spent 4 or 5 years having these conversations up here, and they're complicated conversations. And I know that, I've been questioned. Well, you're not moving. We are moving, right? I meet weekly with stakeholders on both sides of the issue, just to be clear, right? And those conversations are looking at the Senate's proposal, with the conversation at the House proposal they sent over, which was more clearly defined, obviously. But how can we find middle ground? How can we improve what the Senate put on the table as a proposition earlier on? And those stakeholders that are at the table are on all sides of the issue, right? So I've got folks that have been up here, talking against the pipeline project. I have folks who want to see the pipeline project get built, and I want folks to realize that the conversations are ongoing on a difficult issue, and we're moving in the right direction. I really feel that way.
To that, with both of those two issues still to be resolved, and a budget with the revenue situation the way it is, how do you envision these next few weeks? That's not that there's not always a lot of work to do as the session winds down, but those are 3 pretty big tasks on the to-do list. How do you envision the next few weeks playing out and being able to get this work done?
Yeah, that's a great question. And to your point, there's some heavy lifts, right? Obviously, property taxes, eminent domain conversation, and budgeting. Those things come up in the end of session. But again, to my previous point, the fact that we've both moved amended versions of our property tax bill shows us that we're starting to narrow down those conversations. Again, like I just stated, ongoing conversations on the eminent domain pipeline, project, what that looks like, identifying value in the Senate's bill and finding ways to improve that. And of course, budgeting, we just had the March REC that gives us our final budget targets. So we'll start to work through those, in the next couple of weeks, identify those targets, and then start the process of winding this show up. So
you face a March 31st deadline for making a decision on this HMO tax. It's my understanding that CMS has sort of said the bill as written would meet their standards. How tough of a vote is that for Republicans?
Well, Republicans don't want to raise taxes, right? Obviously, but again, I think you look at the MCO tax. It's provided to us by the federal government as a means to draw down additional dollars, right? So the state of Iowa's tax rate right now is 0.95%, 0.95. The next lowest state in the country is Massachusetts at 1.1%, right? So, and then from there they go up. And we see states like New York and California that are between 6 and 10% on MCO tax. And that's a lever that those states are pulling to draw down additional federal dollars. Every state is encountering Medicaid issues, Medicaid shortfalls, and the federal government makes this opportunity available to us. So it's important for us to take advantage of that, right, while we can, to draw down those additional federal dollars on the MCO side. And the conversation on the HMO side is ongoing. Obviously, we want to be, aware of the potential for, cost increases to private health insurance folks and the payers. But at the end of the day, for us to look at the $300 million shortfall we have in Medicaid, this is an important lever for us to pull, and the federal government makes that lever available for us. So the conversations are ongoing, most definitely, and our caucus members are working through those issues, and we will have conversations on that continuing into next week.
So you would have to have a separate bill to maybe give some leeway to the HMOs, the private sector?
And those are conversations that are taking place, right? I'm not sure what that looks like at this point in time. It's really difficult, but again, we want to be aware of that side of the conversation. We want to, sit down and have a serious talk about that, right? Is there a path that's in front of us? What's that path look like? Can we arrive at a destination that we can all agree on?
That bill also contains a provision that would use 100% or cover 100% of this year's budget deficit with the Taxpayer Relief Fund. The House's bill has a sort of different provision on that topic. How strongly do you feel about using more of the Taxpayer Relief Fund than usual?
Well, I think the budget targets, obviously the state of Iowa has to function. We have a budget. Using the TRF fund was always our plan, right? That's why the money is sitting there. It's Iowans' money. We want to give it back to Iowans. We have driven down personal income taxes to 3.8%. We've driven down the corporate tax rate. We provided tax benefits to retirees. We've done a lot of things to make sure Iowans get to keep more of their dollars in their pocket. And the dollars sitting in the TRF fund are Iowans' dollars, right? So that was always part of our plan, to utilize those funds to help us arrive at a 3.8% flat tax for personal income tax and all the other things that we've done as a caucus. So, it was part of our plan, right? So, we're comfortable making those moves. Those moves were predictable for us, and that's how we arrived where we want to arrive.
Are you concerned it's being depleted faster than maybe originally planned?
I'm not, no.
Just to make sure I'm clear on the answer you gave, Kay, should we expect a vote on that bill in the Senate next week, or are you still figuring that out?
The MCO
Yeah.
portion? Conversations are ongoing. I'm not gonna, I'm not gonna commit to a vote at this point in time yet, but I anticipate us, having robust conversations and seeing where that leads us as we attempt to build a consensus. So.
Talking about potential tax increases, a different piece that the governor was pushing for would be to raise the tobacco tax. I believe that piece got voted down to make it through a Senate committee. Is that something that could still pop up? Are there still conversations about it, or is that something that's been ruled out?
At the Senate right now, we're having conversations about, taxing nicotine alternative products like pouches and vapes, right? I think, if you look at Iowa's level of taxation on those particular products relative to surrounding states, we're extremely low, right? So the conversation is, can we raise those taxes on vapes and pouches? The thing with cigarette tax is, every time we raise a cigarette tax, we see a short-term bump in revenues, and then we see a decline in revenues. And I believe I read the stats the other day that only 11% of Iowans are still smoking. So to rely on that as a solution or a long-term source of revenue, our caucus has some concerns with that, right? Where we see growth in vapes and pouches. That market is continuing to grow as an alternative to smoking. So I think we're trying to eyeball that right now, as a potential opportunity for us to provide additional revenues in the Medicaid space that's not tied to raising cigarettes tax at this point in time.
What about the argument for it beyond just the revenue piece, that it's an important lever to try to reduce lung cancer deaths in Iowa?
Yeah, I understand that. I've been transparent. I've been a smoker on and off most of my life, and I get that, and it does dissuade folks. But I would push back and say, that if we're looking at it for a revenue stream, right, which is kind of how I've heard it billed, right, the consistency of that stream gives me some concern. I think it gives some concern to our members of the caucus as well, right? So my previous point is, typically every time we've done a PAC increase, or we see a spike in revenues, and then we see folks that dwindle off on that. And with smoking at an all-time low across the country, I think it's an opportunity for us to look at nicotine alternative products like pouches and vapes, and see if there's some potential for an equalization of tax, right? So we're comparable to what Illinois is doing, Minnesota, Nebraska, surrounding states, without going to a level that we're now disincentivizing folks to buy those products in Iowa.
A couple of weeks ago, the Center for Effective Lawmaking at Vanderbilt University released a report, and one of their conclusions was it is difficult to overstate the degree to which minority party lawmakers are shut out of the lawmaking process in Iowa. They noted that in 2023 and 2024, 0 bills introduced by Democrats got through committee in the Senate. I believe that was also the case in 2025. I believe this year that 1 Democratic bill did get through Senate Education. They concluded this ratio is significantly out of proportion to the number of seats the parties hold in the chambers and well beyond what is seen in most legislatures across the country. Just wanted to give you a chance to respond to that. Do you feel it's appropriate that basically no bills introduced by a Democrat have any chance of seeing the light of day in the Senate?
Well, I've not seen the study, right? So, but I can speak to the fact that I have conversations with my colleagues across the aisle every day, right? I really do. I don't know, those conversations usually yield fruit. They're involved in those talks. They're involved in conversations about bills that we're moving through. Again, without having seen the study firsthand and understanding the metrics they use to arrive at those determinations, I'd be kind of speaking over my skis. So.
In the state government committee last night, the bill relating to the governor's powers was amended to include the proposal we talked about after the last funnel about allowing a budget to continue if there's no agreement reached. Why, we talked about it before. We hadn't seen that bill move forward as a standalone, but why do you feel like it's important to continue to try to make sure that that happens?
Well, so, the bill in the Senate State Government Committee last night dealt with the governor's emergency powers, right? That bill dealt with the closures of places of worship, government being able to dictate what you do in the privacy of your own home, government dictating how you can run your business, and government forcing you to take a vaccination. We felt it was a good vehicle to add on the continuing resolution component. Since we're having a conversation about governor's emergency powers, let's have a holistic conversation about governor's emergency powers. And to why it's important, we talked about this last time, and I'm gonna, look at the federal government right now, right? TSA is telling folks to arrive at the airport 4 hours prior to their flight because they're not funding Department of Homeland Security. I think it's important for us to realize the dysfunction in Washington and to do better, right? To simply do better. And what this does is this sets the table for us not to go down the same path that Washington does. And I also want to pivot and say, in Iowa code right now, being the mayor of a small town for 20 years, in Iowa code right now, if a city council or a county board of supervisors cannot arrive at a budget, in code, it states they will take the previous year's budget. They have to, right, in code. So you look at Polk County, for example. Between the city of Des Moines and the county of Polk, their budgets are over $1 billion, right? And so the legislature saw value in putting those guardrails in place to ensure that those services continued if there was an issue with the budget. So all I'm asking us to do, or all the Senate's asking us to do with this proposal, is simply say, look, if cities and counties have to do this, and if we thought it was good for cities and counties, it's good for the state as well, right? To live under those same.
Couldn't you argue though that federal policy enables their behavior because they know that there will be funding if they just walk away, and that the lack of that in state law forces lawmakers to come to the table and pass a budget?
My perspective on that is I don't need to be forced to do my job, right? But there are those circumstances that are beyond everybody's control, something maybe we didn't envision, whatever that may look like. And at the end of the day, again, we do our jobs. I can't recall, and I don't want to make a statement, fact, I don't recall us never having arrived at a budget in the State House. But if that were to happen, my concern is the impact to Iowans, that depending on those budgets to be guaranteed, the services that we provide. We talked about Medicaid before earlier in this conversation. It's essential for the state of Iowa to function and provide services to its residents. The same reason in code we have this requirement on cities and counties. The same reason, right? You can't have a city or a county, again, to my point with Polk County, $1 billion, over $1 billion between the two budgets. It's important to have a guarantee for Iowans that services will be provided, right? If there's a hiccup in the road, that we continue to function.
Could you talk about some of the issues with the bill that would allow community colleges to offer the 4-year degree program, and why that bill isn't moving forward in the Senate?
Yeah, we again, this Republican caucus just couldn't build a consensus around that. And I think it's really important to point out that community colleges do a great job, right? Their lane is specifically designed to help us build workforce, right? To teach trades, which we have a shortage of in the state, right? And so they provide a critical role in ensuring that Iowa has a skilled workforce. They're able to work with employers currently right now to upskill workers in those spaces where they add new technology or new equipment or a new assembly line. And so I really want to focus on what they're doing because they do a great job in that lane right now. And so I think, the conversation in our caucus was around just, allowing them to continue down that path, to stay in that lane, and provide all the good services they provide for employers in the state as a whole with the jobs they're currently doing. And I think that's extremely important. They provide a path for Iowans to go into the trades and earn a great living and we have a shortage of trades folks throughout the state. So I think it's important for us to recognize all the good work they do and how important they are currently to the state, and to continue to focus on those things.
Was there also a concern, though, with a declining number of high school graduates about competition with private colleges, many of which, like in Sioux Center, one of your members is a professor there, could be in danger?
You know, I don't recall that being part of our conversation so much as, you know, just focusing on the good work the community colleges do right now. There was a cost factor to this as well that was kind of hard for us to ascertain the actual number, right? So, and again, we want to be wary of that part of the conversation. We didn't want to over obligate. And again, I'm just going to pivot back. You know, community colleges do great work. They do. I mean, they're designed to serve a purpose, and they serve that purpose incredibly well. And it's also a place for high school students to have the ability to get credits prior to going into a four-year degree, right? I mean, so, you know, my son graduated with 20 credits when he graduated high school. The community college allowed him to do that, and he cleared a lot of the gen ed stuff out of, you know, his higher education. And I think that's critical. I mean, I think if we talk about cost savings to students moving on to higher education, the ability to come into that through the partnership with the community college to set the table for them on those gen eds is incredibly important. And again, you know, they do a great job in the lane they're in right now. And I think our caucus just had some concerns about expanding that lane. And you know, it was tough for us to build a consensus around it.
The Senate passed a bill that would have codified managed care in Iowa, and the House HHS chair this morning said that House Republicans are not interested in doing that. What's your reaction to that, and why did you feel like that was important to pass?
Well, I'm not going to speak for House Republicans, right? I hadn't heard those comments by the House Republican chair this morning. It was just important for us to set the table to, you know, the system we have, we feel works, the system we put in place, and you know, to make sure that system has some consistency and continuity for Iowans that are in that program space right now, right? I mean, that's the most important thing. You know, we've built this system, there's folks that depend on that system. We don't want to open the door to have significant changes to that system that may disrupt the services those Iowans depend on.
Well, Governor Reynolds is pulling pharmacy services away from the MCOs to save over $20 million. I guess why would you want to restrict governors from potentially saving money for the state?
Yeah, great question. You know, the pharmacy services component of the MCOs, I mean, the conversations are ongoing around those two, right? I mean, we're having talks about that. We've seen several different numbers. Some of those numbers provided to us from the MCOs, some of those provided from the governor's office, some numbers we've looked at internally. And you know, that component of it, you know, while it's not the primary focus of the care provided by those MCOs, is a component of it for sure. And you know, that is a lever we could pull that would not disrupt at large the services being provided to those folks, I think, you know, if there's an opportunity. But again, those conversations are ongoing, and you know, we have to build a consensus to say that's the right path to go down, right? To carve in a PBA as opposed to a PBM. I think that's what the conversation's around. To change the nature of how those services are provided for the prescriptions, you know, for the folks on Medicaid, and making sure that, you know, that unintended consequences are minimalized. And so at this point in time, we're talking about it. I'm not sure where that conversation leads us yet.
Quite a few of the Iowa House higher education bills didn't move forward in the Senate this year. The same was true last year. Is your caucus trying to send a message to the Iowa House Republicans that maybe they don't need to do so much legislating of higher education?
Again, you know, sending a message would be, you know, a really strong way to put that. No, I would disagree with that. Again, at the end of the day, there's 150 legislators in this building, right? Between the House and the Senate, we have different approaches to a lot of different topics. And I know I use the word a lot, but it's essential for us in our caucus to build a consensus around an idea, right? And having 33 voices in the caucus with different perspectives, different approaches to things, you know, is part of the system, and that's what makes the system great, right? And I think, you know, those conversations, you know, just couldn't arrive at a level of commonality with what the House maybe sent over, or those approaches. And to be honest with you, you know, I have committee chairs that we put in place for a reason. I give great autonomy to my committee chairs, and they give autonomy to the members of their committees. And so, I mean, they're vetting these things themselves and having those conversations in the committee. You know, it's important to be respectful of that process, and you know, I'm not going to cast a doubt on what they're doing or how they've approached it.
Have you had conversations that the House Republicans' 3 strikes bill is potentially up for consideration in the Judiciary Committee? Have you all had conversations about that? I understand there might be some changes to it.
As a caucus at large, no, we have not. It's working its way through the Judiciary Committee right now. And to my previous point, I mean, we've got great committee chairs, great committee membership. I'm letting them do their work, right? That bill is on the schedule for today. I know they've had conversations in Judiciary about it. And I don't put my thumb on the scale at that level because I've got great folks in those places to do those, have those conversations. So.
I didn't know if maybe you would have had conversations with House leadership about it since they identified it as a priority.
We've talked about it for sure. Yeah, we've talked about it for sure. I understand it's House leadership's priority, and we're respectful of that over here, and that's part of our deliberation process is to be respectful of that priority. And I think the fact that we're doing our due diligence to ensure that there's consensus over here in this chamber about those ideas in that bill, are very respectful to the House Republican leadership. It's by no means a measure of disrespect. I think it's a measure of respect for the fact they've sent us over something that they feel very passionate about. So,
the medication abortion bill looks like it's not going to advance at least through the phone process. Could you characterize the discussions you've had with your caucus on that, and might we still see that? Are those conversations going to continue? Might we see that as the final bills are being written at the end of this thing?
Yeah, I think there were some components in the bill that presented some pause to members in our caucus. And I think we can all agree on the fact that we don't want somebody receiving 3 pills in a Ziploc bag at their house, right? I mean that was a concern, but the bill at large had some different moving pieces and parts to it. Conversations are still ongoing with that. I mean so I don't know if it has legs yet for the rest of session, but and when we have these complicated conversations, you folks have been covering this building a lot longer than I have been here. Some of you have. It takes us a few years to get on the right idea and the right path, and these conversations aren't always simple. With property taxes, for example, we've been at this now for 4 years, and that just kind of shows the fact that we're deliberate in the process, and that deliberation is a sign of respect to the Iowans and Senates here. Really, it is. So.
What's the consensus for the animal torture bill? Do you think it'll be brought to the floor for a vote?
Yeah, there's conversations ongoing with that, and I will reiterate the facts I said earlier. I mean, at the very top of our debate calendar, it says tentative debate calendar, right? So there were some concerns aired in the caucus that we're addressing and having conversations to see if we can put those folks' concerns about that piece of legislation to ease.
What about, there's a bill I think that's also eligible that would restrict H-1B visa holders at Regents universities from certain countries. Is that likely to get a vote? Have you had those conversations?
Yeah, and I have had conversations on that bill. Yes, for sure. Again, there's some concerns over components of the bill. I understand that we have several H-1B visa holders that are working in our Regents universities, professors and staff. And the H-1B visa process is a federal process. It's cleared by them. They're granted that visa by the federal government. So all those questions are part of our deliberation process on that. I'd be ahead of my skis if I were to say where that's going to end up at this point in time. But we are talking about it.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Senator.
Thank you.